We're going to start our webinar, The Future of Gig Work, now, and welcome to the FAIR Global Series. So the FAIR Network is an initiative of the A+ Alliance for Inclusive Algorithms, as you see in the background there, which is a global coalition that works for a world where machine learning does not embed bias into the systems of the future. And the FAIR Feminist AI Research Network is led by Women at the Table and Tecnológico Costa Rica, and in LAC, Latin America and the Caribbean, by Paula Ricarte at Tech Monterrey, in MENA by Nagla Risk at the American University of Cairo, and in Southeast Asia by Suraj Hangladaram and Supavati Aramwith, both at Chulalongkorn University. So we work with this feminist approach for AI, which is really to look for sort of concrete ways that we can move the needle for machine learning, trying to go from the why to the how we can make these changes. And we do this by also, besides for having global conversations such as this one, is also by funding papers, prototypes, and pilots that work on all of these things. So today we're going to be discussing a very, very important issue with 3 regional players, all of whom come to us by way of our wonderful hub leaders. We have Stephanie Santos, who's in Bangkok, sitting at Chulalongkorn University this evening. We have Wassim Maktabi in Lebanon. And we have Saiph Savage sitting at Northeastern, yeah. So, and I will be introducing them at greater length when each of them speaks. So we're going to hear a little bit, we're going to go from east to west, hear a little bit from everybody, and then we're going to have a panel discussion. So part of the reason why we decided to take up this idea is that the research that's been done on the impact of digital technologies on workers has been very speculative up till now. And even when it's been done, there hasn't been a lot of talk about what the effects are in the majority world, in the global South. So here we're trying to add to a body of research that extends past the global North. And we want to also be asking, because this is a feminist framework discussion, is how inequality is being reproduced, and in what institutional ways is discrimination and inequality enabled both by these platforms as well as by society. And most importantly, how can gig work be transformative, if at all, right? I don't know where we're going to wind up ending up, but I think that that's really the question. So we're going to start, as I'd said, in Bangkok at Chulalongkorn University with our colleague Stephanie Santos, who's a lecturer in cultural studies at Chula. She's an interdisciplinary scholar who uses ethnography, computational humanities, and cultural analysis to examine the flows of labor and capital between Southeast Asia and the global North. Her current book project, Smart Labor, Smart Worker, Solidarity and Resistance in Digital Southeast Asia, examines emerging capacities and socialities crafted by digital workers in response to ICT-enabled modes of labor extraction. Her research and teaching interests include transnational feminisms, Asian cultural studies, and feminist science and technology. Prior to Chula, she taught gender studies at the Metropolitan State University of Denver and was a postdoctoral fellow with the Center for the Study of Women, Gender, and Sexuality at Rice University. And in 2023, she was a Fulbright Scholar, Asian Research Scholar. So we're so happy. How appropriate are those credentials to give us a talk? And we're so happy, Stephanie, and I will just give the floor over to you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Sawadika from Bangkok. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Caitlin Kraft-Buckman and FAIR, the FAIR Network, for organizing this event. And thank you, everyone, for who's joining us in today's webinar. So in this short talk, I will discuss how gig labor from Southeast Asia and its diasporas have and continue to sustain global economies during the pandemic and its continuing afterlife. And I support this argument from findings from my fieldwork with digital workers in Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines. So to start, I was still living in the United States in March 2020 when most of the global north began to shut down and shift to work from home in response to COVID. So amid calls for quarantine and social distancing, organizations scrambled to find ways to do their work in a manner that they were describing as contactless. So at doctors' offices, we had virtual medical assistants taking down patients' symptoms and helping patients check in for their appointments. These small pink robots with like heart-shaped eyes began appearing on the sidewalks of Los Angeles and Toronto, and they were delivering prepared food from restaurants to customers. And as we spent even more time online, there were greater calls for social media companies to institute forms of content moderation, which led to companies like Twitter and Facebook to roll out machine learning algorithms that identify and remove offensive content from social media. So these processes are discursively constructed as artificial intelligence, but what runs these processes are the very hands-on embodied labor of people located thousands of miles away. Virtual medical assistants are powered in real time by human nurses who are based in the Philippines. And those pink robots with the heart-shaped eyes that were zipping around Toronto sidewalks were remotely driven by Filipino operators. And when machine learning algorithms supposedly flagged potentially offensive content, it was human moderators in the Philippines and in India who were tasked with screening and deleting these violent imagery. And it was a task that regularly exposed workers to a steady stream of images of torture, child pornography, and gore. So all these labors are vital to lives in the global north. And it used to be that the extraction of these feminized labors from vulnerable workers also meant migration. So we can think, for example, of how the U.S. population's need for elder care and child care in the 1990s and early 2000s was filled through migrant workers, mostly from women of color. And what is new now with digital platforms is that via these internet and communications technologies, or ITCs, they have engendered the transnational extraction and distribution of care work and other forms of reproductive labor. So in other words, it's now possible to extract the labor of care workers without the migrating bodies of the laborers themselves. And additionally, as shown by the pandemic, the privilege and increased safety of social distancing afforded to many in the global north was built on the socially proximate labor of Southeast Asian gig workers who were made to shoulder much heavier risks. So for many labor studies scholars, the pandemic represented a tipping point for labor conditions in platform economies. And these tipping points have gone in two different extremes. So first, platform companies could conceivably use these transitions to further cement exploitative models of labor and even to spread these to other industries. And we've seen this happen in the more geographically tethered forms of gig work and platform labor. So for example, drivers from Grab in Indonesia and riders for Deliveroo in Singapore have officially been classified as independent contractors, which seems to hold the promise, right, of being able to work whenever you want. What you earn is up to you. However, the gig workers are also subjected to high degrees of algorithmic governance, and their movements and work hours are highly controlled by companies akin to regular employees. Drivers and riders are ineligible for assistance or benefits from Grab and Deliveroo because they were not employees, but due to factors such as how long they have been working and their inconsistent income, many independent contractors also didn't qualify for government aid. So drivers and delivery riders, who are arguably the heart of these platform businesses, have also been subjected to extreme modes of surveillance, which have which are increasingly normalized outside of platform labor. So examples include they have to take their temperature every day. They have to take a selfie and use that to log into their platforms. They are forced to share medical record and other personal data, supposedly in the interest of safety. And while the pandemic has indeed been a tipping point towards naturalizing these more exploitative relationships, the other possibility is something that Southeast Asian gig workers have also shared with me or told me about. This other direction or possibility that shows gig workers themselves using these very platforms to organize, to develop new capacities and socialities that reflect that refuse such conditions of disposability. So Grab workers in Bangkok, for example, started a Line group, a group via Line, which is a popular social messaging and chat app here in Southeast Asia. And what started as a small group of 7 riders, ostensibly to vent, has grown into an organization of over 700 members. And among the things they have done is to establish a mutual aid fund so that members can get treatment or even surgery for injuries that are not seen as job related. Therefore, they're denied assistance by Grab. So this includes, so Grab, for example, will supposedly provide assistance for riders who encounter accidents. In practice, this is also very difficult, but they don't provide assistance for things like lower back injuries, which many riders experience because of the posture, the position you assume when you are riding, but that is not seen as something that is job related, right? So in the Philippines, the Lady Riders Association has long asked platform companies for assistance about clients who would harass or grope them, especially motorcycle riders, and their request was to have for these companies to deactivate the client's apps, which Grab refused to do. All right, so they also requested for financial assistance to install balance bars at the backs of their motorcycles so passengers can hold on to their for balance. But Grab was slow to act, so the women themselves formed a mutual aid group. In the Philippines, it's called the Paluwagan Group, where members regularly contributed to a small amount to a fund. And then every few weeks, one member gets that fund, so she can use it to have a balance bar installed. The group even found a vendor who could give them a good rate for manufacturing the balance bars and for the labor itself. So I will point out that these mutual aid groups are women-led initiatives, which makes sense, right? Given given the multiple forms of marginalization to which women gig workers are regularly subjected to. But this also shows how mutual aid is stepping in, right, for the lack of action on behalf of the platform companies and also the state. Okay. I'd also like to point out how cloud workers in Southeast Asia have been finding ways to use algorithmic governance to their advantage. So for example, many remote workers in Southeast Asia secure gigs by offering freelance services through platforms like Upwork, Freelancer, and Guru. And these platforms place a lot of weight on one's reputation, meaning the more work are directed towards independent contractors who have already accumulated a lot of work and a lot of good reviews. So to maximize potential earnings, workers have used the platforms to re-outsource their gig work to their trusted networks of friends and family members. So for example, there's a transcriptionist based in Indonesia who splits these long transcription jobs into 20-minute transcription files into 20-minute segments. And then she uses the platform to hire people she knows. Many are actually her family members, and she farms out this work. And then, when they're done, every work is done in a rush, and then she combines these segments back into the large file for the client, who she charges extra because it's a rush job. right? So similarly, there's a proofreader in the Philippines who divides her files to be proofread into segments. She re-outsources them to people she, again, has relationship trust with. And these two workers have glowing reviews in their portals. You know, she does the work in half the time, you know, for example. And therefore, you know, this leads them to getting funded more work, which they in turn funnel to the other workers they trust, like a gig chain. So I'd like to conclude by building on these situated knowledge and testimonies of Southeast Asian gig workers who are engaged in platform work and how these highlight two directions for gig economies. One direction is towards sharpened modes of exploitation, surveillance, and labor extraction, particularly for gig workers who are rendered ineligible for safety nets and protections accorded to regular employees and to workers in the global north, which is the destination of most of this extracted labor. And second, we are also seeing the emergence of vibrant forms of organizing and solidarities, which signal the possibilities of online forms of what Donna Haraway has called making kin. And through these online kinships, gig workers in Southeast Asia gesture towards nascent possibilities for survival and even rupture in the liminal spaces of capitalist gig economies. So thank you all for your attention. I look forward to our discussion. Salamat. Kapkun ka.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. So everybody, I'm going to give everyone that's fabulous, a follow-up question. And there are so many commonalities about all the work that each three of you are doing in each region, about organizing, about how these sort of self-organizing principles work, also the structures of gig economy. But the question I want to throw to you, Stephanie, first is how in these geographies where there are many, many women gig workers, how the work has become sort of feminized in a way, and therefore less reputable, less well paid, less, I think that you've done some research to sort of see that taking shape. Can you address that?
Yeah. Yes, thank you for that follow-up. So yeah, first of all, yeah, also within feminist labor, we use the term feminized labor to refer to not just that there's more women doing it, although that's all often the case, and it's sort of a mutually constitutive relationship. It's feminized because it's less valued, even as it's, you know, it's essential and like literally essential. A lot of the essential work that the work we saw that was designated as essential during the pandemic were these very labors that also remain very much devalued, and therefore it's labor that women get. Something that I have noticed is that the employment of women, and there's a question here about also about I think is this Saiph? Yeah, Saiph, about or a comment about employment of workers with disabilities, for example. It's something that companies like Grab are sort of using to build some form of capital, right? So we are the ones, we employ elderly people, we employ women because they can work whenever they want, and then they can take care of their children afterwards, for example, or do care work after. We employ people with disabilities. But something that is being shown here as well is, first of all, there's an outlay, right? You have to pay first in order to gain. You have to pay for uniforms. You have to pay for that bag, for example, that thermal bag, in order to be able to participate in this. A lot of women are unable to work the heavy hours, rush hours, because this is also time when they need to do care work, for example, or in the case of Indonesia, where a lot of women were reported getting harassed. What the algorithm did, what Grab did, was to just shut off women's algorithm and push them into delivery work, for example, to supposedly protect them from harassment, right? So also, conversely, on the customer side, if you wanted to ensure that your driver is a woman, so which is a service that many women were wanting also, and in response to harassment, you have to pay extra for that service. So something that Caitlin, your question made me think about is that these algorithmic ways of ensuring women's safety do actually come at a cost to women, either in terms of their earnings, or they do have to pay more. So a solution to the vulnerabilities and marginalizations relating to digital labor will also necessarily come from outside algorithmic and technological sources.
Yeah, fabulous. And I think maybe we'll pick up again exactly how the structures of the algorithm and these new economies actually sort of reinforce some of the worst of the old that we're hoping to get out of the futures that we build. But now we're going to move across the planet more to, so it's late at night where you are at the moment, Stephanie. It's 9 o'clock at night, and now we're going to go to where Wassim is, where it's 4:30 in the afternoon. And where Wassim Maktabi is a researcher at the Policy Initiative, which is based in Lebanon. His research interests include political economy, behavioral economics, and public finance. And at the Policy Initiative, he covers Lebanon's financial crisis, the political agenda, social protection, and the platform economy. Previously, he was a researcher at the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies, where he conceptualized legislation data to produce an automated legislation tracker. He holds a BA in economics from American University of Beirut. And you have a very different geography and a very different set of gig workers, Wassim, and we'd love to hear about your research and what the situation is in your region. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Caitlin, and thanks, Stephanie, for the thought-provoking presentation. I couldn't help but realize the glaring discrepancy between what's going on in Thailand and Lebanon. Let me start off by saying that the landscape of the platform economy in Lebanon is quite primitive, and we can't really compare the exact same elements between both regions. My talk today will focus on the growth of digital labor as a market-induced phenomena and as a coping strategy for workers and for businesses who have been reeling from a series of shocks since 2019, whereby the size of the economy in Lebanon decreased by around 70%. The unemployment has surpassed 30%. 1/3 of the labor force is essentially unemployed. The local currency has lost 95% of its value. The economic conditions in the country are so desperate that essentially this created a very precarious labor force that is desperate for income-generating opportunities the labor force is very susceptible to rely on negative coping strategies to generate income. One of these negative coping strategies was provided by digital labor platforms that emerged since 2017, mainly Uber and Toters, which are a taxi platform and a food delivery platform. My talk today will focus on basically talking about the characteristics of workers and the conditions of workers in the platform delivery sector and in the platform taxi sector. There are some similarities that we will talk about, and there are some glaring differences. Let me first start off by saying the first common point between the two is that the platform economy in Lebanon is almost exclusive for males. We ran a survey at the Policy Initiative, which is one of the very first surveys on digital workers in Lebanon. The sample was 50. It's quite a modest survey, but it reveals interesting insights. Among the 50 workers that we've interviewed, only one was a female worker who worked in the taxi sector. So this essentially shows that women probably are working in the sector, but they're very underrepresented compared to the male segment of the workforce. And this essentially goes back to two things. First, Lebanon has historically and structurally, Lebanon has a weak labor force participation when it comes to women. So the labor force participation for women is at 22% compared to that of males, which is at 66%. So this feature that we see in the platform economy is not surprising. It's in line with the labor structure of the country as a whole. That's the first point. The second point is that the sectors that operate in the platform economy are culturally and naturally male-oriented. These are delivery work, which is essentially working on a motorcycle, driving in very unsafe areas, where, like driving in Beirut is quite, I don't know if any of you have visited the country, the city, but it's not essentially, it's not Europe. Okay, so the driving here is quite challenging, to say the least. That's one. And two, you have the taxi sector, whereby you accommodate people with you in the car, which is essentially not something that culturally is comfortable for in Lebanon. So the first point, again, is that the platform economy is exclusive for males. The second point that I'd like to raise is that specifically for delivery platforms, we realize that delivery workers in the platform economy are subject to significantly high control by the platform. These workers are who sign or consent to a freelancing agreement with the platforms do not actually exhibit real characteristics of a freelancer, of a traditional freelancer. These workers have to wear a certain uniform, they have to complete a certain number of orders, they have to complete a certain number of online presence. They have difficulties reaching the management for any sort of grievance that they have. In essence, what we find in our study is that they exhibit what we call elements of subordination. There's a relationship of subordination between workers and the management, which, according to Lebanese legal texts, qualify as a employment relationship and not as a freelancing relationship, which paves the way for us to make the claim that these workers should essentially be considered as employees and not as freelancers. However, due to their contractual arrangement and due to the fact that Lebanon's Labor Arbitration Council has not reviewed the case for delivery workers and the platform industry, these workers currently are exploited. However, due to the crisis situation, these workers generally are okay with the fact that they have a venue to generate income. So this platform economy is a way for these workers to get an income generating job at the end of the day. And even when we tell these workers that you actually can get social protection rights, such as social insurance, social assistance, labor protection, legal representation, etc., maybe we can talk about this more later. These workers are generally reserved when it comes to this topic because there is some sensitivities when it comes to formalizing the sector, when it comes to being under the spotlight by the state. On the other hand, in the taxi sector, I'll try to be brief here, not to take too much time. The taxi sector workers legally have to have a license plate to be able to work in the sector. And once you have a license plate, you are traditionally considered as a formal employee status. You are a formal employee, and you are qualified to receive legal representation and social protection and union representation. However, because of the crisis and because of the massive influx of vulnerable workers who are seeking income-generating opportunities, the platform taxi sector witnessed a large number of workers who do not have a license that are trying to work in this sector. And again, because these digital labor platforms are not being regulated by the state. The platforms are free to recruit any person who has a car or even a motorcycle, which is illegal for transportation in Lebanon, as a taxi transportation in Lebanon. These platforms are recruiting workers to provide these services. So essentially what ends up happening is that you have legal workers who have paid money to get a license, and you have workers who have entered during the crisis without getting a permit for it, competing against each other for getting clients and getting income. What this does, the implications of this is that instead of uniting worker grievances against the management, you end up having two sides in the worker group competing against each other. I'd like to leave it at this for now. Maybe this can create some anticipation for Q&A. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Wassim. I'm wondering, I think maybe I'm gonna circle back to you when we have our discussion, because I think that Stephanie has brought up this idea of the self-organizing groups. You brought up the idea of groups who are reticent and reserved to organize. And then I think it would be, well, that's still so fresh in our minds, it would be good to go to Saiph, who actually has been working with people who are organizing, sort of blending both things. And then I think when we do get back to you, Wassim, I'd like to talk about different ways that it could be regulated. But if you don't mind, we're going to now go all the way to the US, where Saiph is sitting, where it's 9 o'clock in the morning, because I just sort of love the idea that we're spanning like a whole half a day. And Saiph Savage is, I'm going to introduce you though very well, is an assistant professor and the director of the Civic AI Lab at the Corey College of Computer Sciences at Northeastern University, where her research focuses on creating intelligent civic technology to organize collective action for change, and which includes battling misinformation and empowering gig and rural workers to access better jobs. Before Northeastern in 2021, Saiph was a tech worker herself at Intel Labs and Microsoft Bing, and a crowd research worker at Stanford. She taught or directed at West Virginia University, Carnegie Mellon, and University of Washington, focusing on human-computer interaction or human-centered design at each of those places. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Saiph, to hear your view on all of these incredible thoughts.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. And thank you very much, Caitlin, for the invitation to participate in this. And also thanks to your organization, Women at the Table. It has been a true honor to be able to collaborate. So I'm a computer scientist, and my research has focused on understanding gig workers, their conditions. We have had a focus with Caitlin. We were working on understanding gig workers in Latin America, understanding the challenges that they're facing, and then designing tools for them. And that's a little bit about what I'm going to present today. I actually saw one of my collaborators also in the chat, and so thank you so much for joining. It's Michael Mueller. So with Michael Mueller, we have also been working on understanding gig workers. We do, since we're computer scientists, we do a lot of participatory design with workers, and through this, we have been designing novel tools for them. So one of the things that we found through our participatory design and interviews, on one hand with the women workers in Latin America, was there was a significant number of women gig workers in Latin America. A lot of them were actually single women. And gig work was an activity that they were doing to start to get into the workforce and start to get independence from their families. A lot of them came from middle class. So they had already a computer. They had also English skills, which I think helped them to be able to find jobs. And so this was, I think, a difference with what Wassim was presenting, that women were not as involved in the gig economy. Here they were heavily involved in Latin America, and also in difference to, for example, what has been found in India, women in this case were keeping the money for themselves. So for example, in India, it has been found that they had to give their earnings directly to their husbands. In Latin America, they expressed through the survey that we conducted that it was for themselves. And so through our survey and interviews and participatory design sessions that we've had with these gig workers in Latin America, we wanted to understand how do they imagine, for example, now with generative AI, we have ChatGPT that is very much displacing a lot of these workers. And so we have been very interested in now thinking about, okay, so how do these workers imagine that these types of tools could support them, could enhance their work instead of displacing them. And so I'm going to present some of the tools that we have been building. And this was also done with the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, which Caitlin's, basically we've had a collaboration with Caitlin where we've been working together to understand the needs of gig workers in Latin America, and then we have been designing tools for them. So I'm going to share my screen to showcase a little bit of the tool that we have been building. So we did some participatory design with workers, and this is actually, so we have a number of different tools. This is a new tool I think that Caitlin hasn't seen, so it'll be exciting to hear about what she thinks. So some of the things that workers expressed through our participatory design sessions was that they wanted to have a type of personal manager, because as you know, gig work, you're very much alone, you have to figure things out, etc. And so they wanted a personal manager that could especially help them for really having a much stronger bio, also presenting themselves much stronger through cover letters, and also a manager that could help them in creating a schedule. And what is interesting is that they didn't want this manager, so they wanted a manager, but they didn't want this manager to work for the gig platform. And so it was very important that it was their personal manager, and it was somebody that would just be focused on them and wouldn't have the needs of the company in mind. And so with that, we created, using GTP4, we created this platform that is basically a manager for the gig worker. So the gig worker can start to say a little bit about, for example, okay, you want to create your bio. Let's share to us about your strengths. And notice that, for example, maybe you could think, well, why don't they just use ChatGPT to be able to do this? There has been a lot of research that has shown that not everyone knows how to prompt it. And so right now we're creating an interface that guides workers to have their own personal manager to help them in really presenting themselves strongly for the gig economy. And so here they start to share, for example, a tone that they want. Maybe it's like, let's say they want to be friendly and humble. And then maybe here they want to say, you know what, I am a mother of 4, and I know how to write well and have a career in writing. And then maybe this is for my online profile for Upwork, which is a gig platform. Show that maybe she wants to showcase that she is very hardworking, And so the women in our interviews, they expressed that they wanted this type of manager, personal manager that would help them in creating their bios. And so here, for example, we have this little AI assistant that creates a little bio for them, and then they can chat with it, chat with the virtual assistant to start to improve their bio. For example, maybe they can say, you know what, add that I studied at the University of Buenos Aires. And so here the worker is allowed to polish it. And so here basically overall what we're doing is that we're making generative AI more accessible for the gig workers so that they can use them for their different tasks. And so in this case, they have a manager, a personal manager that is helping them and guiding them to be able to create the the bios and present themselves strongly. And then they can create cover letters, they can create their schedules. Another thing that they mentioned was that they also wanted a personal secretary who would help them with summarizing, grammar checks, translation. So for a lot of them, even though they did know English, the ones that we were speaking with, and this for demo purposes, right now this interface is in English, but we have it also in Spanish. A big thing that they wanted was to have a lot of rapid translations that they could use for being able to communicate. As Stephanie mentioned, you have a lot of global South workers that are delivering services for the global North. And so being able to communicate effectively was very important. So that's why they wanted a secretary that could help them in their translations. And also another important thing was about the NDAs. So this, I think, relates a little bit to what Wassim was mentioning, that workers have to navigate a space where they do have to fight for their rights, but then finding out how to best leverage that is a little bit complicated. And so here, this assistant helps them with their NDAs. And so overall, this is a little bit about the tools that we have been building, where in our focus, we do interviews, participatory design sessions with workers, and then we're building tools for them. And as I mentioned, also we have been working with Michael Mueller, who's here, and with him, we've been looking at how do workers imagine the type of data that they have about themselves so that they can collaborate with each other and potentially fight for collective action. And thank you again, Caitlin, for having me.
Thank you. And you're right, that is shocking and wonderful to see that you've hacked prompt engineering, and like completely brilliant. I mean, I think it's amazing. I need a prompt engineer in my pocket as well. And later, maybe you show us the NDA, because I love the idea that people are going to be having that many different NDAs. So let's just go back for just a second, because there's many forms. And indeed, we had said for this webinar, what is gig work anyway? Because it means different things to different people and different geographies in different ways. So we have sort of the terrestrial gig workers, right? Who are doing transport, who are doing deliveries, right? So all sorts of transport, human transport, food transport, which we talked about in Lebanon. We talked about in Southeast Asia or Asia, and then also partly some of these Upwork things, some of this kind of gig work, piecemeal work, office work, administration work that you talked about, Stephanie, but also Saiph is directly addressing. And also a lot of this mechanical Turk work, right? That's online work. That is what it's necessary to have command of English to be able to do at this point in time. So anyway, so there are these two kind of divisions, and one is very much online and one is very much online in the physical world. And those are two different things. So I just want to recognize that and bring that up. But all of the commonality, I think, and please feel free to correct me, is also going to be is sort of how is this regulated? How is this looked at? How does this interact with analog structures, in real life structures? And how are we taking, at the moment, the worst of these analog structures and putting them into the digital? So in other words, how are we just sort of putting, so these have technically gender neutrality. So there could be a woman gig worker, transport worker in Lebanon, but there are inequalities from the real world that are being built into the way that the algorithms work, as well as realities on the ground, right, of being harassed. So so where is my first question? I have so many things to say, but maybe let's talk about organizing and the self-organizing in a way. And let's start in reverse order, because Saiph, some of your participatory research showed that the workers were not necessarily, a little bit like Wassim had said, not really interested in organizing, even though they kind of felt a need for it. So can you address that? And then maybe Wassim would talk also about the reticence and what that means.
Yeah, so actually I would say that several of them in Latin America, they were interested in the organizing. I think that there was also a notion, and this also came up with the research that we did with Michael Mueller, There was also a notion that they wanted the data to be useful for their own wellness. And so, and I think here it also goes into gig work many times is already putting workers against each other. And so you have to fight a little bit in order to organize. You have to help workers to see that the platform themselves has been alienating them from others. And so for them, it was more important to think about their own wellness. And they were taught, when they talked about the other workers, they saw them as the other, like, oh, we need to collect data about them because it's likely that they're acting wrong. And so they saw them as another evil, let's say a bad actor, than thinking about solidarity. But in part it is because the algorithms of the platforms have been designed to put workers in competition with each other, which makes it hard for them to start to organize. And so I think that maybe it's also important to think about education for workers to help them to see that, oh, the platform is putting you against each other. And it's not really that the other is evil, but rather it's maybe the platform that is creating that environment.
Yeah, that brings me up to this so well put in the chat, which won't be captured, of course, by the recording. So I'm going to write it. Stephanie wrote to Wassim to this point about his points about the paradoxes by independent contractors who don't have any of the traditional options of freelance workers. So there's this freedom idea that you can work at any time, day or night, but quite frankly, there is no freedom. It's actually much more constraining. So can Wassim and Stephanie sort of you expand a bit more on that, starting with you, Wassim?
Sure. On the issue of unionization, again, there's difference between the delivery sector in Lebanon and the taxi sector. Let me start off for the taxi sector. Legally working as a taxi driver in Lebanon, you have to be part of the existing union. However, we've been witnessing a large number of workers who are entering, who are not unionized and have not entered through legal procedures without having a permit. These workers, the way these workers unionize is actually quite informal. They do so through a WhatsApp group, and they communicate on a WhatsApp group to try to organize a sort of, let's say they work at platform A and they want to compete with platform B because they perceive them as a potential threat to their work. What they do is that they would download the application of platform B only to take some of the clients from these workers and then reject them. So they would just sort of create this disruption to the work that exists. But again, any sort of legal union countrywide representation is still sparse, at least to me as a researcher. You know, I'm not a taxi driver. I don't know what happens inside these conversations. For the delivery sector, which is frankly more precarious because most of the workers are actually non-Lebanese. These are Syrian refugees or Palestinians who are on the fringes of society when it comes to the priorities to the state, the Lebanese state and the government. In terms of the list of priorities, these sort of communities are not at the top, not in the hierarchy of priorities. And what these workers care about is just making sure they can get their income on time at the end of the day or at the end of the month. And I'll share a story from one of the workers and one delivery platform. They've once sort of like compiled a list of grievances that they've shared with the management on a WhatsApp group. And what the management responded with is that they said, this is not how you communicate with your managers. What are these lists of demands that you want? If you ever raise these points again, we will fire you and hire someone else. So these workers, unfortunately, are very substitutable to the platforms. Again, because I started off my presentation, my talk by saying, currently the state of the economy of Lebanon and the state of the labor force is very precarious to the point where most people need sort of a venue to generate income. And if it happens through a delivery platform, so be it. This is much better than any other alternative that could exist. Sorry for this very bleak picture to
Yeah.
you, Stephanie.
Yeah, so sorry. Stephanie.
Yeah, I've been thinking, I mean, of course, the tasks of organizing um, are already very fraught in the Philippines, which is where we have a state that is very much dependent and wants to safeguard our status as a friendly, business friendly environment to work. Just in terms of the form of gig labor that is being done as cloud work online. So the structure of that is very much built on the existing BPO, business process outsourcing structure that already exists, that's already very well developed in the Philippines. And I think that's where the potential for organizing is stronger. We have call center workers who have organized, and therefore, people who are, we've had I've seen I've spoken with content moderators who, for example, like, at great risks, they have NDAs, but there was a very powerful documentary, for example, recently called The Cleaners, where content moderators spoke about their jobs because they considered it like really important for people to know that there's this labor. There's in feminist STS we call it artificial intelligence, right? There's this labor that is holding up content moderation, for example. And I remember recently there was a feature on in the Washington Post about the digital sweatshops, where you have Filipino workers who were doing the task of training, doing the training work for ChatGPT, and doing like the labeling, the very detailed, like laborious process of labeling maps that on which the driverless technology is dependent upon, right? And these are like nascent forms of organizing where they're making demands for fairer labor treatment, for fairer pay from organizations like remote tasks, for example, and that's the one that has the most organizing potential. They're also being supported. Part of it is also because they do have the support of Philippines-based branches of advocacy organizations like Fair Work. But for the more geographically tethered forms of labor, geographically tethered forms of gig work, so Grab operators, not as much organizing in the Philippines, but we've seen organizing strikes, for example, labor strikes from Jakarta, Vietnam, Pattaya, in southern parts of Thailand, that are where workers are banding together and showing their demands. And again, I think that gets to the point earlier about how solutions to digital labor problems just are greater. They do lie outside of algorithmic governance. What remains harder are tasks like people who are doing remote forms of remote caregiving, remote elder care, for example, there where people are doing it working from their homes, monitoring elderly people, for example, from elderly homebound people from their homes, and that work is much harder to organize, mainly because they're not together. The distance, the dispersiveness makes it difficult even for call centers to reach them as well. So.
Yeah, and it's also, you can't, exactly, because you're not next to the other workers, you can't see.
Yeah,
what
literally, yeah.
even more difficult. I see Wassim, you wanted to weigh in here.
Yes, thank you. I had a question for Stephanie. You mentioned briefly that when it comes to the geographically tethered platform work in the Philippines, there's no much organizing taking place, but you've mentioned some protests that have happened. My question is, how do platform managers respond when these things happen? Or what does the media cover these events? Because in Lebanon, usually the platform, excuse me, not the platform, but usually what ends up happening is that the protest eventually leads to some sort of violence between the workers and security apparatus, either from the state or. And then the platform issues like a public statement downplaying the issue and reaching some sort of a middle ground solution.
Yeah, which is what happens in the Philippines as well. So I think that's one of the sad commonalities that is happening, and especially in areas, there are provinces in the Philippines where governors actually make it an election point that we are we are a strike-free zone, for example, and strikes are dealt with a lot of forms of state-sanctioned violence. So that makes it harder, in the Philippines as well. Although it's not exactly organizing, but something I've been thinking about is there's a lot of riders and drivers who have their who are telling their narratives on Grab, I'm sorry, on YouTube, right? So recording themselves and sharing their narratives on social media, and I'm thinking that it's something that brings out also their experiences with the platform, their pushback and critiques about the lack of transparency in terms of the way that Grab and Food Panda, for example, the lack of transparency in terms of what gets you up into higher tiers or higher batches so that you can earn more, for example. So it's again like a very beginning part of like critique and getting workers' voices out. So
Saiph.
Yeah, I wanted to compliment a little bit what Stephanie was mentioning, because in our research, I think this is exactly where the workers' data is extremely important. Because if workers don't have data about what is happening in their platforms, they could think that, oh, this is just a one-off event that happened to me. But once workers have their own data that they can say, hey, this thing is actually affecting 60% of our workforce. This is a big thing. They can also more easily take that data to policymakers, take the data to journalists who can do something about it.
You had found in your survey a lot of this. Are you talking also about what I'm calling the terrestrial gig workers, or you're talking about the sort of the platform workers?
Here we were, so I think that there is value for all gig workers. We have been primarily focused on knowledge gig workers, but I think for all gig workers, having their own data is crucial.
And have you seen anybody who's created a environment or an app?
Yeah, so you have drivers. So on one hand, in our research, we were looking at how different types of gig workers, what type of data did they want to collect about their workplace. That's actually a new paper that we have with Michael Mueller, who's also here. But for example, there are a number of platforms that exist for helping workers to collect their own data. The problem is that a lot of them are not as worker-centric. But one example is Driver's Seat. Driver's Seat allows Uber drivers, Lyft drivers to be able to collect their own workplace data. And this is important because, for example, Uber was caught wanting to manipulate workers with their own data. Basically they were telling them, oh, if you work 4 more hours, you're gonna earn 60% more, but it wasn't necessarily true. And so since workers didn't have the data to be able to see if they are being manipulated, they would then fall and they would be working more without actually earning the compensation that the company was telling them.
So when we're thinking about, well, there's a lot of different ways to regulate, a lot of different ways to think about how that would be crafted. But is there anything that anybody knows about the legislation in the works or regulation in the works that has to do with the platforms having to be honest and transparent with their employees, which would seem to be like the absolute bottom line, but probably in this instance is more difficult. All right. Well, so we haven't seen that yet. I mean, one of the things, and I'm going to ask you actually how each of you, if you have thought of it, so you can put your hands up if you have thought of it, of how you think regulation maybe could work. I mean, is a regulation a way to go? And B, if you do think it is, like what exactly, which levers would you pull? What approach would you take? Who would like to go first? I mean, it's saying that gig work is just regular work and having the protections, the social protections of any factory worker. I mean, could one way, yeah, here, hands going up now. So Wassim.
Sure. I can talk about the case in Lebanon because that's the case I'm confident. A first starting point would be to actually reflect platform workers, and I'm talking specifically about geographically based platform workers in your labor statistics. Because currently, classifying labor workers as as self-employed is not very true. It's misleading because usually self-employed are those that are under liberal professions such as lawyers or doctors. So classifying a taxi driver or a delivery worker as self-employed is not doing them justice. So the first entry point is for the state to actually take stock of the composition of the labor force, not only by gender, but also by functions of work and by status. So this means you would have a new category that's called platform workers. That's the first entry point. So you need to know how many individuals in my country are actually in this form of work. The second step would be to simply enforce existing labor regulations. Again, you don't need to reform anything at this point. So the first point is to actually just have a mapping of your platform workers to understand how many are they to size the platform economy. Second point, enforce existing regulations in these digital labor platforms. Because as we've seen in Lebanon, specifically the delivery platforms are violating Lebanese legal regulations about work. Because on one end, they would have a contractual freelancing arrangement, but in practice, the managers are enforcing or are treating workers, are subjecting workers to subordination, and they exhibit high control over them, which merits an employment relationship that grants workers employee benefits, health coverage, social insurance, etc. The third point, which is a more comprehensive approach, this would require some political capital. You would have to generate sufficient political support from parliament and government to get political parties aligned to legislate a new social protection system that is anchored on the principle of treating social protection as a right. So in essence, what this would do is that you would extend the coverage of social insurance and social assistance to all segments of society, specifically those that fall under the category of missing middle, the segment of the population that is informally employed or that do not benefit from a traditional employee status and what have you. So this is my take when it comes to Lebanon. I'm pretty sure that this aligns with the needs of many countries in the Arab region, by the way.
Yeah, I think so too. Saiph had a fire alarm go off in her building. She'll be back as she's being evacuated. So it's fascinating times everywhere in the world. But so Stephanie, what are your thoughts on this?
So I agree with everything that Wassim has put forth. And probably just to add on to those points. And here I'm drawing this is the feminist AI research network. I'm drawing from I am drawing from Sylvia Federici. I'm drawing from the works of Kathy Weeks. We need universal basic income, right? And as a continuation of social services. But I think one of the scary points that people misunderstand and sort of critique about universal basic income is that people won't want to work, and the opposite of in cities where universal basic income has been instituted as experiments, the opposite has been true, right? What this institutes is security, right? And if people are secure that the basic needs are going to be met, they do work, they continue to work. But what doesn't happen is, they don't have to accept conditions of alterity, of working in very fraught and in very vulnerable conditions. So it gives them that form of power and leverage. Something that obviously it's a very big change, but something that the pandemic has also shown and been a tipping point of. Disability activists for the longest time, right, have been advocating for work from home accommodations, and businesses and offices have been saying that's impossible, that will cost too much. And then when the pandemic happens, we were able to do it. We were able to do it like fairly efficiently and quickly. And so, what the pandemic has also shown was like the current conditions that we have of working as this strange hybrid of as an independent contractor who doesn't have any freedoms of an independent contractor, and like being regulated as an employee without any benefits of being a full employee. It's unjust. It is something that greatly disproportionately affects workers in the global south, in countries in countries in Southeast Asia, in Lebanon, in Latin America. And it will take a lot of political will to make this adjustment, and organizing to make this adjustment. But I'm thinking, with the pandemic as a tipping point, I'm also seeing a lot of people, particularly young people, who are, refusing to accept the current working relations we have as inevitable. And it's something that gives me hope for the kind of sustained systemic change that needs to happen.
How do you see the content moderation world? Because so many of the jobs that you talked about business processes in the Philippines are the jobs that are most at risk from generative AI, right? I mean, we had thought that they would be sort of factory jobs that would be automated classically in the Industrial Revolution, like by robots, but actually the jobs that are most at risk are these kind of admin jobs, which are predominantly filled by women, as we know. And but it appears to me that maybe content moderation is not going to be, that's always going to need labelers and people working in the kind of trenches of this ever eating machine that we have of data. But where do you see this evolving, and how, and also, do you have a vision for how it could be humane and how it could work?
I guess a little a story about content moderation. So first of all, something that's striking to me about content moderation is that this is the only job where I've heard people who are doing this job, first of all, they insist on being seen. There's somebody doing this work, but they also say that this is work that shouldn't exist. So it's a recognition of the trauma, right? So I feel like what is that in that job, what is being outsourced is not just the task itself, but the trauma that comes from this. So building from that, I mean, I was like thinking about content moderation in gender terms. I've been asked, for example, like point blank asked, like, how would you feel, for example, if your grandmother, so a gendered figure, right? If your grandmother was like searching for cookie recipes and all of a sudden she sees like genitalia, or she sees pictures of gore, right? So and it's something, so that's why content moderation is important. And to me, that just signifies like the figure to be protected, right, is a grandmother from the global north. Often, we can make the argument that she's white, and the figure to be sacrificed for that would be brown bodies in the global south. So maybe for me, building from Judith Butler's idea of shared vulnerability, right? So if we're going to have the internet, this incredible technology that with its incredible benefits, then the risks of this should be shared as well. So I'm not saying that, I would like to go searching for cookie recipes and then, stumble upon unwanted pictures of genitalia or gore. But I feel like that is something that we should all have to risk so that somebody doesn't have to do it like 25,000 times a day. So that's sort of my take on content moderation. So again, it's a solution that's outside technology.
Yeah, I also wonder, it's a very interesting and really super powerful thought. I mean, I'm wondering also whether we won't get better at automating part of it, right? So that there'll be, you know what I mean, layers and layers of it. No, you think?
Maybe, and that's the hope, right? But for now, as long as most of these modes of automation, so even the training for ChatGPT, right, is being done by bodies in the global south. So as long as these artificial intelligence continue to be mobilized for this, right? And part of the reason why they continue to be mobilized, I mean, the company Remotasks, which is, a big player in terms of providing labor for artificial intelligence. They've been recognized by Forbes, for example, as like, the brilliant solution that they did instead of devoting more and more resources into developing AI technology, fuzzy logic. What this company did was present a much more cheaper, more affordable solution with resources that already existed, which by resources they meant laboring bodies in Africa, in South Asia, in Southeast Asia. So, and the resources the resources, as long as market logic is the deciding factor for advances in artificial intelligence, then I guess as Wassim was saying, like the pessimist, maybe the pragmatist and the pessimist in me just fears that what this means is a lot of the trauma and violence will continue to be borne by Black and brown bodies and by women. Yeah.
Don't even know how to count. That is very pragmatic. So I don't know whether it's pessimistic or a downer. I mean, I'm hoping, and maybe this is classical, maybe this is just an old system that I'm referring to, and maybe it's not even relevant anymore, but I can't help but want to believe that some form of organizing, some form of global organizing might actually help the situation a bit, because it's not going to really help just worker by worker trying to either decide to starve or to just sort of submit to the machine. Because as Wassim said so eloquently, if people are just really trying to get by on a daily basis, they're going to, I mean, there's survival needs that need to be met, which are obviously what are being taken advantage of.
I have faith in Gen Z, so I have faith in their generation's like refusal to accept the current ways that we have been dealing, whether it's with environmental damage, market logics in terms of the working world. So I'm in my hopeful days, I do have hope that they will they will be harbingers of a solution. Yeah.
So on that kind of hope note, I'm going to go to Wassim and then you, just to be, what do you wish? What changes, what immediate changes would you like to see? And then what sort of longer term change, if we're going to turn for the better, because people are so need creativity in their solutions.
Wow, what a question. What's my wish list for the platform economy? Oh God. Essentially for them to be, for the workers in the platform economy to receive their rights, essentially, because this is not a wish list, but rather something that should be given. So we're not aiming high at this point. We're aiming, because essentially the work that they do is that of a traditional employee. Therefore, they should receive their end of the deal. So they're giving hours of work and commitment, but they're not receiving the employee benefits that they should. So that's something to start off with.
Right. So we go back to a rights-based approach, which we absolutely 1,000% agree with. Stephanie, your thoughts?
And yeah, I will echo Wassim again, and I'd like to see platform the gig work platform economy to be led by a vision of justice that is conceived of and centers and dictated, well, not dictated is a bad word, but it is conceived of and by and centers workers. Right? And I think, I mean, this is again like building on Kambahi River Collective, of black feminist idea of like if you build from the position of the people who experience the most intersecting forms of marginalities, then the product will necessarily be more inclusive, be more just. So yeah, a vision of justice that starts from workers, and I'd like to see that spread.
Actually, very well said. So, sorry, Kate.
No.
That's actually very well said. That's even better than my wish, because essentially you want the platform economy to take the shape that workers have a say in how it's designed. So very well said.
Yeah. It's building off of you. So yeah, it was like
It is.
pinging
Well,
up one another. Yeah.
That's what we need to throw out as a challenge to everybody. We're talking about what we want to paper and prototype and pilot. We want to, maybe we try and help something that's conceived by, and as you said, and centers workers. It's a very, very beautiful way to say it. And I think that that is something that could, if facilitated, something that's actually could be done and could be, and not only centers workers, but maybe also workers are participants in the profit generations that happen as well, which was, there's also no reason why we can't vision something that is, more than just non-exploitive, but is actually income wealth generating and dignity generating.
Thriving,
yeah. So we thank you very, very much. I mean, for me, it's like super exciting to be able to hear all these, different geographies, different regions, the commonalities, the same sort of mission purpose that you all have, but with such sort of different, specificities. And it's just, I'm very, very grateful that you joined us today, and very grateful that this is going to go online, and colleagues are going to, so thank you, Stephanie Santos, thank you, Wassim Maktabi, and we thank Saiph Savage, and we hope that the building, just the fire alarm went off and there was no real fire. Yeah, we too. So thank you very much.